This is a 1994 Dodge Viper, but it's not just any old Viper. This was my Viper that we bought sight unseen in Omaha, Nebraska and absolutely rallied back here to Seattle, Washington. Now, as you can see, this old girl's looking a little worse for wear. It's not green anymore and it's not running. But today, we're gonna see if we can get this baby back on the road. Welcome to Ideal.
Now guys, we're doing something pretty special. We're gonna rescue a subscriber's car while he's out of town that's been sitting for years and surprising him when he gets back.
Mostly just because we felt like doing something ideal. So here's the situation. The car's been sitting for at least 3 years. Obviously the battery's dead and clearly something's been living in this thing. And like I said, it's not running. Now that could be for a number of reasons. Everything from a bad fuel pump right on up to a locked up engine. But these old V10s are pretty tough, so let's just start with the basics. First, we check some basic fluids and give it a quick visual, and everything looks good. After testing the battery, which was, shocker, completely dead, we opted to hook up the jump box and just see what happens. Now, if a car's been sitting a really long time, it's usually best to try and rotate the engine by hand before just jamming the starter into the thing. But seeing as this thing's only been sitting for a few years, and like I said, these V10s are really tough, we're gonna have to take our chances. Plus, I don't have the right tools to get on that crankshaft and spin it by hand anyway. Fingers crossed. Nothing. Time to do some diagnostics. Now, if you remember, when I first bought this car, the clutch switch was a little finicky. Look, that's a pile of ratchet, like, oh. So we start by bypassing that switch. Ooh. And still no love. With the car up in the air, we go straight to the starter to test if it's got power and verify whether or not it's getting signal from the ignition switch. Well, everything electrically tests good down here. I think this starter is dead. Now we could probably fix it temporarily by just whacking it with a hammer, but this one looks original and we want to make this car reliable long term, so let's just go ahead and replace it. Whenever replacing a starter or alternator, it's best to disconnect the battery to avoid accidentally shorting anything out. Since the battery is completely dead, there's no real risk, but we need to replace it anyway. Then it's as simple as rolling around on the ground, removing a few bolts, dropping the starter on your face, and putting everything back together. All right, with the new battery in and the starter installed, let's twist the key and see if this thing fires up. Fingers crossed. Oh, hold on. I gotta wait. I'll hit it.
Let's do it, baby.
All right. Come on, baby.
Oh Jesus, man! The exhaust is right by my—
With the Viper running again and oil pressure looking perfect, we let it warm up to make sure it wasn't overheating and the engine seemed healthy. And with that, time to jam the old girl on the highway and get it back to the garage where we can give it some much needed attention.
No way, dude, the Viper is back. I mean, this is incredible. The amount of experiences we've had in this thing is ridiculous, and to hear that incredible V10 once again, this is like dreams come true, huh? If you haven't seen the video, this is the very car Trav and I got the cops called on us because the seller's crazy ex-girlfriend thought Trav had forged a check.
Which I did not.
And then we had the road trip of our lives, driving over 1,600 miles through lightning storms and a tornado warning and getting absolutely soaked in a rainstorm. Whew, I love it wet, because this Viper didn't come with a roof.
Oh, and Brad's face got in a fight with one of the biggest bugs I've ever seen. Truth is though, this old car never skipped a beat.
Dude, do you remember when I burnt my leg on the exhaust?
We had some big plans for this beast, but unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, I had to sell it before I was really ready to.
Don't feel too bad for him, folks. The main problem with keeping it was the fact that he didn't have enough garage space to have 2 old Vipers.
Look, indoor storage was a factor, but for reasons we won't get into in this video, we ended up selling the car to a good friend of ours and a subscriber of the channel. And as you can see, the old girl is, well, it needs some help.
Yeah, that would be an understatement, man.
Hey, at least it's running now. We got it here.
That's true, but before we get this thing on a lift, I think we should probably give it a bath.
You mean you should probably give it a bath?
Like we said, this Viper had been sitting for a couple of years, basically exposed to all the elements. So we started by rinsing off all the loose dirt and debris that we could, and then got to scrubbing. Now, I am sure any of you detailers out there watching this are cringing. Not using a foam cannon or a pressure washer to help minimize superficial scratches is a sin. But the reality is this paint isn't in great condition, and eventually this car will be getting a full respray. And all that water in the carpet and interior? Trust me, that was already there.
Before pulling the Viper into the garage, we decided to remove the side sills. We'll need access to the exhaust system later in the video, and removing them with the car on the lift is basically impossible.
And while Trav took his afternoon nap, I got to work detailing to try and make this old snakeskin shine. I started with a clay bar, then moved on to paint correction. First with cutting fluid, followed by a polishing compound, and then finish it off with a hand wax. In the midst of all that, I decided to try and restore these headlights. A set of these babies can run upwards of $10,000. So anything that we can do to improve them without causing any damage is money well spent. And while, yeah, it certainly is not perfect altogether, it came out better than I expected.
With the detail out of the way, Brad got to work on a quick and dirty refinish of the side sills.
We are not going for perfection here, folks. These sills need major body work, but a quick scuff and spray makes them look good enough for the girls that we go out with.
With the cosmetics dealt with, it's time to get started on some of the work under the hood. The engine on this Viper is completely covered in oil, and first thing we want to address here are these valve cover gaskets. They're old and dried out and leaking oil pretty badly, and while there could be additional leaks from other places like the oil pan or power steering pump, it's a good idea when fixing oil leaks to start from the top down. And while the valve covers are off, we decided to give them a quick coat of paint as well. We tried pressure washing, sanding, and then got serious with some aircraft stripper. The next morning, we mask, scuff, prime, and finally paint. We went for a high-temp crinkle finish that should look close to the way these would have when they left the factory. Finally, some light sanding on the Viper logos, and we're ready to put it all back together. Now, we're doing a few more repairs and maintenance items on this car, but I couldn't wait any longer. It's time to finally give this V10 the exhaust it deserves. When Brad and I drove it home from Nebraska, it was completely straight piped and straight up too loud to actually enjoy. At some point, the car had some sort of mufflers installed, but they're too quiet and the tips look awful. Our friends at Belanger Performance helped us out with a 3-inch stainless side pipe kit that uses their resonator and should sound amazing. It came with everything we needed, including clamps, but we opted to weld it all together. Everything is super high quality and fits together perfectly, but there is some cutting, measuring, and fabrication involved here. Due to the hand-built nature of these cars, basically no two Vipers are exactly the same, which means some fine adjustments are required on each and every one. That said, the later cars, like the 3rd gen and newer, have tighter tolerances on everything from the factory, making things like exhaust systems fully bolt-on capable. Before firing it up, time to go underneath and address a few other problems. The big thing here is to go after the engine and transmission mounts. When flooring the accelerator or shifting aggressively, the gear selector moves violently left to right, and the big heavy torque monster of a V10 isn't easy on the rubber isolators trying to keep everything in check. These engine mounts are completely separated, but luckily replacing them is extremely straightforward. Remove the bolts, lift the engine, swap them out, and put everything back together. The same goes for the transmission mount. Usually, it's not recommended to run OEM rubber mounts together with stiffer poly mounts pretty much anywhere along the drivetrain. But from personal experience, a good set of stock engine mounts paired with stiffer transmission mounts works well on this platform. Next, we give the Viper a quick oil change using the correct Viper-specific filter that's designed with a different bypass valve, and finally, move on to addressing the power steering. These cars have known problems with their power steering systems. The cap can come loose and blow power steering fluid everywhere, and even when the cap stays on, the power steering fluid itself is known to heat up, splooge out the top of the cap, blow all over the side of the exhaust, and that's how you burn a Viper down. So today we're gonna do something about that with some good old-fashioned fuel hose and this nifty little overflow bottle. We're gonna mount that back by the brake booster here, and that way if the power steering fluid decides to try and overflow, it'll just go into this bottle and not burn this car to the ground. This car has already had its power steering pulley upgraded. But by installing essentially a catch can, we can prevent, the power steering fluid anyway, from catching this Viper on fire. Long term, we'll fabricate a bracket to bolt the catch can to the pedal box, but for now, double-sided 3M adhesive that's actually meant for rear view mirrors will do the job. And with that, it's finally time for a cold start with the new exhaust. Finally, time to reinstall the side sills, take it for a drive, and get it back to its owner. In the world of cars, there aren't many quite like the Viper. And while I have a soft spot for all of them, this particular RT10 is pretty special to me. And after a few years of it essentially sitting and rotting away, it's finally back on the road. And the journey with this car is not over. It still needs some basic maintenance. Spark plugs, transmission and diff fluids, the fuel gauge isn't working properly, and I think this car is still somehow on its original head gaskets. It was a known problem with early Vipers, so we should probably go ahead and address that. Maybe even upgrade the camshaft and bolt on some headers while we're in there. And cosmetically, it eventually is going in for a proper repaint, but in the meantime, I'd like to see if I can adjust the front fascia and core support to improve the headlight gap. We still need to get all the remnants of that green plasti dip peeled off, and there are various bits and pieces and trim on the interior that need to be refinished or replaced. And that's all before we talk about the brakes and suspension. Brakes are working fine right now, though I did pads, rotors, and fluid before I sold it. But there are improvements to be had there. If you guys are interested in seeing any of that or more car content like this in the future, let us know down in the comments. If you want to watch the video where we first bought this Viper and road tripped it home, or you want to hear the whole Viper story, links are in the description below. Lastly, big thanks to Belanger Performance. You guys are awesome, the exhaust sounds great, and even bigger thanks to all of you for watching this video. Go check out some of our other Viper content here, or if you're all Vipered out, go watch whatever YouTube thinks is best next. And again, hit us up in the comments if you want to see more of this car. Otherwise, my name's Trav, that's Brad, this is Ideal, I'll see you all next time.